afternoon. ServiceNow and Carahsoft would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Federal Tech Talk, Beyond the Portal, Creating a Unified Digital Front Door with ServiceNow and Modern HCM. Just to tell you a little bit about Carahsoft, we are the trusted government IT solutions provider supporting federal, state, local, government, education, healthcare, and private sector industries. We connect our customers across the US and Canada with thousands of technology vendors, resellers, system integrators, and managed service providers to deliver a comprehensive range of solutions and services to meet organizations' needs. Carahsoft, in conjunction with our vendor partners, is pleased to host and sponsor thousands of educational and informational events each year, ranging from webinars like today's to accredited trainings, trade shows, roundtable discussions, technology forums, users groups, and more. Carahsoft holds a wide variety of schedules, contracts, and purchasing agreements that streamline and simplify the IT procurement process. As the master government aggregator for our vendor, reseller, and integrator partners, Carahsoft has assembled a comprehensive IT solutions portfolio that includes products and services across multiple technology verticals to support organizations with mission-focused solutions for cybersecurity, FinOps, multi-cloud, artificial intelligence, customer experience engagement, and more. Now, I'd like to hand the floor over to our speakers. Bahar, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Tech Talk and Fireside Chat, Beyond the Portal, Creating a Unified Front Door with ServiceNow and Modern HCM. Organizations investing in modern HCM platforms like Oracle, SAP, Workday, and others are making smart strategic moves. But here's what the implementation roadmap doesn't show you. Phased deployments create months, sometimes years, of fragmented employee experiences, HR staff toggling between legacy and modern systems, employees unsure where to go for what, and service teams absorbing the friction that technology was supposed to eliminate. This session is for federal HR and IT leaders navigating that reality, but really the same concepts apply to organizations in private sector as well. Today, we're going to unpack how organizations are using ServiceNow as the unified front door across their HCM transformation, not to replace these platforms, but to make the transformation and transition invisible to the workforce. What we will share with you today is a strategic framework for drawing the line between the system of record and the engagement layer, real workflow examples from high-impact HR processes, and an honest conversation about what actually reduces the burden on HR teams and the friction on employees during modernization. So with that, let's get started. So I'm pleased to be joined by a great panel today. I'll ask each panel member to introduce themselves briefly in the order in which they appear here on the screen. I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. I'm Bahar Niakan. I've spent the last 25 plus years across public and private sector roles focused on how organizations deliver services to their employees. In the federal space, I led HR service delivery and technology modernization at the Department of Health and Human Services and focused at the Office of Personnel Management on government-wide workforce development. Today at ServiceNow, I partner with organizations on core business workflows and AI, helping them move from fragmented experiences to a more unified service experience. And I do that with organizations across the globe. And so, Steve, I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Bahar. My name's Steve Krauss. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here with everybody today in this esteemed panel. Like you, Bahar, I spent the last 25 years or so in the federal space working on various themes of IT modernization and enterprise transformation. I spent most of the last 10 or 11 years in the federal government myself, about 6.5 years at GSA, the last 3.5 years at OPM, where I was leading the HR QSMO and the HR line of business, working with agencies across the government on their HR IT modernization journeys. And I'm now out on my own as a consultant, helping companies and agencies who are trying to navigate these waters.
Wonderful. Welcome, Steve. Great to see you. Greg, over to you.
Hey, Bahar, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. A lot like Steve, I'm honored and privileged to be a part of this panel today. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Greg Smith. I'm a managing partner and the chief executive officer at a company called Stridepath Consulting. For the better part of the last 25 years, I've spent time in both the special operations community as well as the HR technology community. And over the last 20 years or so, like I've spent most of my energy helping large organizations complete HR transformations. Thank you very much again for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Brandy, welcome.
Thank you. And like Steve and Greg, I'm also honored to be here and part of this panel today. Really excited about the topic. I'm managing partner and chief operating officer at Stridepath Consulting, working with Greg. I lead large scale employee experience transformations for federal agencies and enterprise organizations. And my focus is on making work simpler and more human through digital experiences powered by the ServiceNow platform. Over the past about 3 or so years, I've had the privilege of providing operational leadership to a DHS agency and partnered with OCHICO and OCIO to implement cross enterprise workflows for employees and in order to improve the employee experience. As part of that partnership, I also had an opportunity to lead a rapid response team in answering a mandate for workforce restructuring with voluntary early retirement authority for about 400 eligible employees in 3 weeks on the ServiceNow platform. I've been in the IT consulting space for about 20 years now, and I've spent more than the last decade working with the ServiceNow platform and on human-centered modernization. Again, thanks for letting me be a part of this conversation. I'm super excited.
Thanks, Brandy. It's our pleasure. And Tim, over to you.
All right, thanks, Bar. Hey, one admin note before I go. It sounds like we're having some difficulty on the other side with people being able to see the screen. Could we go full screen with the slide?
Uh, it is full screen. Let's see.
I guess it's being seen side by side for those.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. I'll reset.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Tim Enright here. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to have a great conversation with everybody we've assembled for the panel. I've got the great fortune of having responsibility for our federal core business workflows team. I've been supporting the pre-hire to retire journey across federal for 20 plus years. And over the past nearly 9 years at ServiceNow, have really been focused on the enterprise service delivery lens. So as we zoom out from pre-hire to retire and we think about all those things across the broader continuum of the moments that matter, it's truly enterprise service delivery. And that's that connected experience across the platform, which we're going to dive in today. So again, thanks to all that have joined, and we're looking forward to the conversation. Bahar,
right.
back over to you.
Thanks, Tim. And hopefully everyone can see a full-blown screen now.
We can.
Okay, perfect. So on the screen in front of you, you have our agenda for this afternoon. We're going to start with the employee moment and then talk about the governance frame, where the HCM stops, the cross-domain gap, the objection, why now, and then we're going to have a frank conversation about AI and really what AI requires. And so with that, we're going to transition into question number 1. Let me start with something concrete here. I spent years at HHS leading HR modernization programs, and I saw many of them launch with great ambitions. And I can tell you that employees don't experience the milestones of those programs. What they experience is their own individual moments on a daily basis. You know, the morning that they have a question about their leave and don't know where to find the answer and don't know who to ask, or a separation package that no one seems to own, or if you're in the military, a PCS move that's stalled. Greg, from your perspective, what does that moment actually look like when it breaks, and what does it look like when it works?
Well, I'd say, Bahar, that the experience looks a lot like it originates with like a request or a question that an employee has, right? And they've got a day job to go do, but they've got a problem at hand. And in this context, we're talking about administrative problem in the context of HR. And so it's not their core mission, it's not what they're hired to go do. And so the goal should really be to try to resolve this issue and let the employee get about their work in the most expeditious way. And so in today's context, the experience can be somewhat fragmented because it usually starts with a question. And I know the federal government has many different forms in which a question can be surfaced and taken in by HR to go answer. Could be a phone call, could be a portal, could be a walk up, could be a hey, go see your manager. And that experience transactions that are really important that need to be taken care of. And those are typically handled by a core HR system of record. But there's a service management aspect to the things that we're talking about when it comes to questions and requests that go well beyond transactions. And so, what we aspire to deliver for our customers and what we'd encourage everyone on this call to think about is how do we make those experiences better through defined prescribed intake forms to meet employees where they're at, where they're working, whether that's through a mobile device, whether it's through a telephone call, whether it's through a consolidated portal. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to give them consumer grade experiences to get their questions answered and their requests fulfilled so that they can go back to completing their mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Simplicity and consistency, right? And giving them some visibility into where their actions are. So, Steve, now you've written about the federal HR modernization, we're moving on to the governance frame, and that it's fundamentally a governance problem, not a technology problem. You've been pretty direct about the risk of agencies each advocating for their own variations until the whole program drowns in corner cases. Given where HR 2.0, the transformation happening across the government, sits right now, including phased waves and years of parallel operations ahead, what does success actually require that isn't in the procurement documents?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bahar. Well, look, I mean, first of all, any modernization effort is always really about balancing various needs and agendas and requirements from different stakeholders. And if you look at what's going on right now with like OPM's HR 2.0 effort, that is certainly the case. And it's a great example of this because really the key challenge for the government in this case is going to be balancing the needs of individual agency, the enterprise cost, and improve service across the board. So so there's always that tension. What I've written about in particular is about how to use the OPM standards as guideposts and guardrails for figuring out how to make those decisions and how to go about thinking about that. Because when we talk about the OPM standards, and there we're talking about constructs like the Human Capital Federal Integrated Business Framework or the HCFIBF. We're talking about the Human Capital Business Reference Model. These are these are acronyms that probably a lot of people on this call are becoming more and more familiar with. Really, when you delve into those standards, you've got process standards and you've got data standards. The process standards that kind of get into the activities and the business capabilities that agencies should have to do human capital management functions, and then the data standards that include the data elements and aspects of those things. The process standards and the capabilities that are documented in the OPM standards are actually designed to be fairly loose fitting. They're not overly prescriptive. They describe capabilities at a high level. They don't necessarily get into the nitty-gritty details about exactly how an agency is supposed to do these things, just that agencies should be doing these things, right? And so it gives agencies leeway in terms of figuring out how to make that standard fit for their business. The data standards, by contrast, are actually a bit more prescriptive or tighter fit. And that's by design, because if you want to design a system in which ultimately you're going to have interoperability across the government, everybody really has to be pretty tightly locked down on the data elements and the data standards that we're talking about. So what I've written about is that that the key to maintaining that balance is partially how you set up the agency's needs and sort of bounce that against the needs of the enterprise. But it's largely about using the flexibility of the process standards in conjunction with the rigor of the data standards to get to the right
Awesome.
outcome.
Tim, if you could share your perspective on this, and also, and beyond that, if you could extend this concept of the governance frame to our colleagues in the audience who may not be from public sector.
Yeah, for sure. So what I find really interesting in Steve's writings and what you've explained here, I think the process and data standards frame is something to really anchor on. Why? Because from a data standard standpoint and how prescriptive it is, when we think rule, law, policy, data standards, when we look at the capabilities of systems to have frameworks in place to support that through data standards, then giving agencies the flexibility to transform process in their systems. And this is where it gets into, in that HCM lane, the importance of those systems being, they have a reason that they are rigid, right? Because you need data consistency. It's a non-negotiable. It has to be there because that core, the HCM is that from a system of record standpoint, at the root of it, it's so important because you're capturing information that impacts people's benefits, their pay. Those are the things that we walk away with. But when you think to the process, those are elements that provide a great deal of flexibility. As we get deeper into the conversation, we'll start to talk more HCM transaction workflow outcome, right? But I think at the end of the day, that process and data standard that Steve speaks to, especially when you get into the exposure of data rooted in the HCIM, as well as additional elements. Steve, I know we're probably going to go down this rabbit hole at some point around data, right? Around the EHRI reference elements, right? There's so much that comes out of government, again, based on rule, law, policy, and data standards. And when we can anchor on those data standards and bring flexible systems to bear, tying flexible and rigid, we can really start to accelerate outcomes when we're looking at this HCM transformation. Now, the tie to those in the audience that aren't zeroed in on FedHR 2.0, it's all around HCM transformation. And these things that we're speaking about today cascade outside of the walls of the federal government. It's just that there could be, and I saw a lot of folks on today from industry. Industries solve these problems over years and years, right? When we think about even at ServiceNow, when we think in that HCM landscape, 900 use Workday, 200 with Oracle, and 300 with SAP. There are organizations solving these interconnected journeys and stories right now. So that's why I'm glad we're having this discussion today because the script continues to be written.
Yeah, thank you. So, Greg, you've spent years on both sides of this, and we're moving to question 3. Where does the HCM stop? And you worked on Workday implementations at scale and now ServiceNow. When you're sitting across from an HR leader trying to figure out which system does what, how do you actually draw the line? And where does the system of record end? And where does the system that drives the employee experience begin? And how do you help the HR leader really understand that line?
Yeah, thanks, Bahar. The truth is there's not a simple one size fits all answer for this, but there are some very common frameworks that are applicable to all. So I think it's really important to understand, hey, what's the intent and purpose of a core HR system of record? Because it is a system of record where people transact, and it has a ton of value in it. In that there's a lot of security layer wrapped around it. There's governance mechanisms. There's audit capabilities, and it really needs to be buttoned down and tight and access controlled very heavily because of the nature of the transactions that are taking place. And by way of example, when we're talking about running a federal agency payroll, there's a lot of sensitive data in it. So there's good reason why that these systems are so structured and so secure, because they're the importance and sensitivity of some of the transactions that are being held. Now, when we move over into the experience layer, where people need to be able to engage and interact, we're talking about employees. We're not talking about payroll managers or HR managers who understand what it means to have a position, right? Or the definition of a position or the difference between a position and a job. These are people who are operational people in nature and who do other types of work for a profession. And so this is where systems of engagement like ServiceNow really shine, where you can put a layer in front of those HR systems of record and transactional systems to speak in a language to employees and managers that they understand, and they can get their questions answered quickly, and they can get the requests that they're looking for fulfilled in a more natural language to them. And in the event that you cannot do that in an automated or self-service way, we're providing the bridge to connect the employee to the human resource professional to get those questions answered.
Great. And Steve, does that match what you've seen from the governance side?
Yeah, I would say by and large it does. I mean, look, if you look at what OPM is trying to do and what they've talked about in terms of integrating or consolidating up to 119 different human capital management systems into a single platform, and you think about the various missions of different agencies that are involved, you're going to have a lot of flexibility. Um, the modern SaaS-based HCM platforms today can do a lot more than they ever could in the past in terms of configurability. And so they're able to do a lot of that. But there are limitations to that. And so this is everything that Greg is talking about is consistent with conversations that I've had or seen being repeated across agencies.
Yeah. And wishing all of my agency colleagues and colleagues at OPM the very best with this huge endeavor.
Mhm.
So, Brandy, over to you for question number 4, the cross-domain gap. So, here's what I keep coming back to. A new hire at a federal agency doesn't just need HR actually to process their paperwork, because it's really a larger process than just HR as they're onboarding. They need a badge, they need an ID card, a CAC card, they need their IT accounts provisioned, they might need parking, they might need relocation, they might need an office or a new chair in their home office. A separation is even more complex with payroll, IT, access, revocation, facilities, benefits, you name it, everyone gets involved. So how many of the HR processes your teams actually work touch 3 or 4 other organizations before they're resolved?
Oh, so many of them. And you brought up some really great examples that highlight that. And just like Tim mentioned, even in his introduction, we're talking about moments that matter for the employee. And those moments really rely on cross enterprise workflows to make them seamless and to bring empathy to the employee. So if I can, I'll just take a moment to center on the example of the voluntary early retirement authority that I mentioned earlier, VERA. Um, Consider being a part of the workforce and serving your agency for 25 plus years. And then, due to workforce restructuring, you need to make a decision that's going to impact your lifestyle, your livelihood within a matter of weeks. With the federal agency that we served and rolling that out, we had a 3-week timeline to make that happen. And although Ochiko was the orchestrator, they were the employee's central point of contact. They had to partner with other departments like IT, like facilities, to make sure that once the employee stepped into the process, once they had transparency into their eligibility, once they understood their benefits package, that IT was ready to go in terms of revoking access, provide or deprovisioning laptops, equipment, facilities, could ensure that the badges were handled, and that all of this was done again with empathy towards the employee. It was so important in those moments that the employee had a central pane of glass to go to request to be a part of the program, that they had open access to the policy information that was relevant to them in that important moment, and that they had a way to communicate with their point of contact. They didn't care who at the back end was servicing that part of the workflow. It wasn't important to them. What was important to them was that they had transparency and visibility into where they were at in the process, how long it was going to take, and that they had confidence that their information, their years of service, their eligibility, again, their benefits package, that it was accurate. So I love to use that example because not only was it rapid and it impacted hundreds of employees at one time, but it it also, I think, brings to life the human part of that element. Like we get excited or we sometimes fixate on the solutions, but it's really important to consider the human part of that and their point of view. So that was just one example. Tim, I know you've dealt with several other examples. Are there any that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I think from a example standpoint, I'll level it up because I think Brandy, what you touched on there, and it anchors a bit in, the lead in for our title, right? A unified experience, that unified front door. Especially in those moments that matter. And I have a request. I need to get something done. And really looking at it through the lens of the single stepping off point to get service, right? No matter the request type. Greg, I think you earlier when you were speaking, I know you didn't say shotgun envelope, but I knew you wanted to, right? Telephone, walking down through the cube farm to ask to get something done. But tying it back to the from a service delivery side, right? Is that with you, Brandy, with you mentioning from a Vera standpoint, there's that human, that empathy component to it in service delivery. And when we think about the role that the ServiceNow technology plays, it's to help support that. Because typically when we look through that HCM lens, HCMs are really great for HR, full stop. Employees have a very challenging time interfacing with that, right? So you've got to provide that agility, that experience layer to do that. So you guys were able to support a complex process that critically important that that you were able to lead with empathy to get that done in support of employees. It's because there's use cases like Vera. You could also, when you think about if we look across our different mission areas and customer sets where and not so uncommon things like a death in service, right? That could be on the MilDep side or in our land-based organizations that fight fires, right? And so you've got to have this engaging, enabling, empathetic process to it, removing that rigidity wall, and that's where the service delivery lane comes in.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Brandy, for your help to those employees. So, Tim, I'm hearing your perspective on the HCM and its ability to do service delivery. Federal agencies are going to hear from HCM vendors that the new platform handles service delivery natively, the HR platform, employee portals, chatbots, self-service, and more. So can you help us understand the boundary clearly? Like, what does an HCM actually own? What does ServiceNow actually own? And where does an agency get into trouble by assuming that the HCM, the HR system, can cover both?
I'm gonna do a little bit of the talking here, but I'm gonna phone a friend with Greg and Brandy's experience about this because it's one thing to hear the OEM lens, it's the practitioner side to this.
Absolutely.
So the first part is going back to our the last question we raised, where I talked about the unified front door, the single stepping off point to get service. A lot of things that come into the HR shop they're not just rooted in the things the HCM does, right? When we think about in the current PWS from OPM, it's around PAR, pay, Ben, time and attendance, right? Those are big bucket items with impact and rigidity. But what it doesn't get into things are like, say, ERLR, like a ULP. It doesn't get into things like um, a within grade increase for those on the acronym train, WIGI. It doesn't support things like a request for a transit subsidy. Um, if we think about return to office and the influx of requests for RAs, right? Reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is a cross enterprise case type, right? If we think about an RA, there could be an impact on facilities. I need to have a standing desk moved into a work area. I need a ergonomic chair for my work for where I'm seated. I may need a screen reader, right? Those are things that don't live inside of the HCM. This is where you need that flexibility standpoint. Steve, going back to our rigid and flexible conversation, right? Service delivery is not a rigid thing. It's got to be flexible. And you can't do those things inside of the core because rule of thumb is you don't want to over configure and or customize the core because then there's a long tail technical debt challenges with that. So I think those are some of the key pieces when you put the elements side by side, like what is HCM and what is like something like a service delivery platform like ServiceNow do. I think that's a good breakdown because you got to think system of record, system of engagement in action, and then you drill down from there. But I'll defer to Brandy and Greg for because they can probably get a bit more granular on this, and I think this is probably one for us to spend a little bit of time on, especially as we kind of compare contrast.
Yeah, I'd love to start, Tim, but I'd like to keep pulling on that thread of like what the intent and purpose of a core HCM system is and why it exists. And I don't mean to make it sound a negative for these OEMs that produce core HCM systems, but they're trying to build HR payroll solutions that are driven by legislation, they're driven by compliance, they're driven by security. And when you think about the Workdays, the Oracles, the SAPs of the world, they're building those HR systems across industry. And we all know that large enterprises here in the US, as well as federal agencies, are pretty unique, or they've got some uniqueness about them. So all the acronym soup that you threw out there, Tim, like is not common in the commercial enterprise space, but it is very important in the federal agencies. And the reality is, no matter how much a core HCM product wants to satisfy those requirements, they never will be able to. And it's why there's a lot of customizations that sit on top of federal agency core HR payroll systems today. And my thesis with this is so if the core HCM system is not going to productize this and you can't go buy this off the shelf and go implement it, you're going to have to go make an investment to do those types of processes somewhere else. And so what we've seen in practice is we've seen, one, agencies go out and buy custom application development tools. And there's a whole lot of good reasons about how expensive and the maintenance associated why that's a bad choice and bad path. The less evasive option that we've also seen in practice is agencies taking it upon themselves to build lower code items and building solutions on things like Microsoft SharePoint, where it might be easy to configure, but then you lose a lot of the security, compliance, and rigidity that you need for enterprise-like solutions. So I like platforms like ServiceNow as that middle ground option of where you've got a lot of flexibility, you've got a tool set that you can build solutions at an enterprise level to go satisfy some of these fringe use cases like Vera, like VSIP, and like even background checks. Background check is a very complex business process for HR inside of federal agencies. How do I get people cleared to show up to work on day one? It can be it's a moment that matters to employees, but today there's low to no visibility for HR and for those managers because of all the touch points associated with going through a background check today. But that's a really good example of where ServiceNow or platforms like ServiceNow could really shine.
And just to add on to that, I think another example of where platforms like ServiceNow shines is again in the flexibility. Like if you think about the workplace over the past couple of years of being mostly in office and then working remote and then going back to the office, those are big transitions. And Tim, to your point earlier, it requires the orchestration across the enterprise. It's not just HR servicing those needs. So even to be able to adapt to the changing business needs, a platform like ServiceNow that offers that flexibility and workflow, still with a familiar and single entry point for employees, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah, if I
perfect.
can just chime in real quick, I think one of the key messages here is that people should take away is it's not all or nothing, and it's not something that people should think of as everybody needs this, everybody needs that, nobody needs this, nobody needs that. Um, every agency, every company that's facing these choices really needs to evaluate their needs. Tim and Greg, you did a great job just sort of illustrating why core HCM systems focus on what they focus on, right? That's how you can get to a standardized platform that can serve, the entire federal government. But there are things that go beyond just HR functions, and that's, you gave some good examples there, Tim.
We have a question that goes beyond HR functions, and we'll come back to that for sure. Just a reminder to the audience that if you do have any questions, there's a Q&A button. You might not see it on your screen. You might have to click the button under more with the ellipses to get to Q&A, but you could add any questions that you have in the Q&A, and we'll try to come back around to them before the close of the session. So one of the arguments we hear is that we should wait until our HCM is fully deployed and then layer on service delivery. Again, so let's wait until the HCM is fully deployed and then layer on service delivery. Now, Steve has written about the productivity J curve and the dip before the benefit, and I will come back to you, Steve, to define that for us. And then Greg and Brandy have watched agencies try to manage that dip. I'd like to pull the whole panel in on this one. And Tim, I'll start with you. What actually happens to the workforce if you wait?
Talking about with transformation, why not to wait till after go live is you've got to get in front of that massive transformation, this huge change management effort, because you want to get in front of it and insulate your employees from the change, right? Because when the organization modernizes, you've got organizations that have been on legacy HCMs for a long time. This is a massive transformation. So how can I put an engagement layer in place that is agile, that allows the organization to continue to execute on its mission and service the needs of its employees, right? Modern engagement layer to support agility and outcomes with service delivery behind it, because there's still services that need to be delivered to the employee that don't require the HCM, right? So you want to have that continuity of operations in an environment that will as much change management as you throw at it, it's still going to be disruptive. It's still change. But I'll defer to Greg and Brandy to go a little bit further, given their in the trenches experience leading these types of transformations.
Yeah, I'll start it off, Tim, but I think that inevitably when you're making a transition that's as large as like a core HCM or payroll replacement, there's going to be issues along the way. And if I'm Chico or any HR professional, I'd want an engagement layer to be able to communicate with the workforce in place prior to making a major change like that, because ultimately that's going to be the intake channel by which you resolve their issues and address any concerns that they have. The second part of this to me is, a service management solution is not quite the effort that it is to go implement a core HCM or payroll solution in total. And so there's an argument to be made that there's more value in a shorter period of time to start with your service management operations and solution before you go try to tackle a large HCM payroll implementation.
Great. Brandy, your perspective?
I mean, I think Greg covered it really well. At the end of the day, the mission doesn't stop. Your employees are still going to have service management needs, whether you're going through this HCM transition or not. And platforms like ServiceNow, to Greg's point, can be implemented to solve those HR requests, to solve IT requests. In doing so, you can open up the lines of communication with your employees while you're going through that transformation, so that while you're going through it on the back end, they still have that familiar front end to interface with. And hopefully the experience is not as jolting for them as it was for you rolling it out. We know that those can be challenging implementations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And then Steve, I promised that I would come back to you for a definition of the productivity J curve. Can you explain
Sure.
it for all of us?
Sure. Well, and to connect it to the comments that everybody else has made here, it really kind of comes back to usability, right? And that's how employees experience everything that we're talking about here is in terms of the usability of the process, the usability of the platform and the tools that they have. Every enterprise transformation program um, starts with the aspiration and the objective of improving productivity, but it usually doesn't start out that way. And that's what the J curve describes is the effect of changes such as large scale enterprise transformations and implementations on employee productivity. And the point being, it looks like a J, right? So initially, productivity usually goes down before it goes up. I think we all know from our experiences, probably personal experiences, people aren't actually all that thrilled with the new system on day one. It's frustrating. It feels clunky. They're not used to it. They don't know the shortcuts. They haven't figured out, the keystrokes. And so at the beginning, it actually reduces productivity. But the trajectory of that J is is a big determinant of overall program success. Eventually successful adoption, it's not binary, like did you adopt it or did you not adopt it? It's not even linear. It's like if you look at that, like I was saying, the trajectory of the J, and if people here remember like your high school or college calculus, it has to do with the rate of change and it has to do with the area under the curve. And so the degree to which you can reduce the negative portion of that first part of the J, the degree to which you can make it go quicker and faster and get to positive trajectory faster. Not only does that improve your short-term outlook, it actually accretes over time and contributes to a more positive outcome altogether. So what's the key message here? The key message here is as you go through an enterprise transformation like this, what can you do? What strategies can you take to keep the processes feeling as familiar as possible, to keep the systems and the tools feeling as usable as possible? I think those are serious considerations that agencies can and should take in mind as they approach this coming transformation.
Thank you for that context. All right. Now, the OPM performance work statement explicitly calls out agentic AI as part of the HCM vision. You may have heard a lot about agentic AI right now. There's a lot of excitement out there about it. And at a very simple level, it's really just AI that can take action. Am I sharing the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes.
It's really just AI that can take action. So instead of an employee figuring out, for example, what to do next or which system to go into, the AI can understand the need and really start to resolve it across any system. So every agency is being asked to think about AI in HR. Steve, I'll turn to you. You've written that the HCIM data standard is essentially the training data set for federal AI. That agencies should stop viewing data cleanup as a compliance chore and start viewing it as AI readiness. And we've seen that in our customer organizations where the cleaner the data, the better the outcomes. So what has
Sure.
to be in place before AI in HR really delivers on its promise, and what breaks without it?
Yeah. So it sounds glib, but it's really true. It's all about the data, and it's all about data quality. Everybody is being pushed really hard to get to um, significant and positive outcomes with AI. But the truth is, you can't get good AI outcomes with bad data. The AI is going to act on the data that you have, and if the data is not clean, I'm not sure exactly what you're going to get, but you're probably not going to get what you're hoping for. Um, and so, that calls back to a couple of things here. One is it calls back to my personal passion about the HCIM and the importance of the data standards and the reasons why that's a tight standard and why they're rigorous and why I think that's really important. Um, it calls back to, you know, OPM already is telling agencies as part of their preparation for HR 2.0, one of the things they really need to be focusing on is examining the quality of their data and taking action to clean that up. And then finally, that kind of mandate can sound like a chore. It can sound like a compliance activity. It can sound like something that you need to do because OPM told you that you need to do it. I think it's useful just to reframe this, right? If we're all interested in getting to a world where we're getting good outcomes out of AI, it should be exciting to us to have the opportunity and to really focus on getting that data right, because the quality of your AI is going to depend on it.
Absolutely. Other members of the panel?
Yeah, Bahar, I'll add here, right, from the AI lens and rooting in what Steve talks about is the importance of that foundational layer. To get to those outcomes, I'll look at it from the OEM lens of when we talk about the digital front door, the unified experience, right? So investments made to transform that experience. No longer is it just ask a question, get a generative response. When we look in the spirit of a front end experience that it is agentified, that's agentic. That's where we look at things that have been incorporated, like MoveWorks, right? Moving from a kind of a scripted response to one that can take, it's a conversational experience that can understand intent and orchestrate outcomes for the requester, for the employee, that front end experience. Then we look on the back end side of that, right? Those business users, the HR staff and other personnel out there. But I say HR, so 201s or even IT, 2210s, right? Because that's enterprise service delivery. That's where you're using the power of something like Now Assist on the back end because it's got the knowledge and the structured workflows to handle the work, right? But it's all rooted in the data elements, right? That Steve has spoken about. So the importance of data on the front end as well as the back end fulfiller side, because at the end of the day, for anyone in the IT side of the house that's in this conversation, they're probably thinking of, hey, how's this impact my MTTR? For the HR side of the house, you're saying, how do I get stuff done quicker? Right? But I mean, Greg, anything that you'd add there based on what you're
Yeah,
seeing?
yeah, I'd love to. I would just encourage people to think about this as a continuum, not as hey, I'm going to go spend 3 to 6 months and it's a project that gets started and ended. This is a new way of working. It's a brand new technology that's incredibly powerful that, we are all learning about, or have been learning about for the last 18 to 24 months and will continue to learn over the next 2 to 3 years. I don't believe that AI is going to be a light switch that we flip in the next 6 to 12 months, but I can promise everybody on this call and anybody who listens to this, in 3 to 4 years' time, everybody will be using AI, agentic AI, and generative AI as a common form of doing business in the future. So if we're not talking about it, experimenting with it, putting it in production for like easy use cases today, we will fall behind as HR professionals.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our key takeaways, I did want to go to the question that's in our Q&A. And that really touches on some of what each of the panel members have shared. And Brandy or Greg, I'll ask you to consider this question. So, in the spirit of OPM, HCM, discussing HR processes, those HR processes, how will they integrate or interface with payroll or financial systems and provide HCM solution data display?
Brandy, if you're okay, I'd love to take the first shot at that one and allow you to pile on, but there is not a one size fits all answer because the integration points are going to be different. But just know that in practice, there are a myriad of integration optionality. Like a simple form of integration could be a deep link from your orchestration system like ServiceNow into that core business process sitting over in your HCM solution. Very lightweight, not very sophisticated, but easy to maintain, easy to redirect employees. You can also go to data integrations where the functionality that would exist over in a core HR system is replicated in your interaction layer, and then you pass the transactions back and forth over to core HCM system. And that's what we typically think of when we think of integration as a data integration. In the future, and we're seeing examples of this in production today, AI is actually an integration method. Today, when you open up a MoveWorks like prompt or a ServiceNow virtual agent, or even inside of Microsoft Teams with a connector, you've got the ability to start a transaction in ServiceNow and finish it in a core HR system of record. So there's a lot of different ways to architect the integration experience, but you got to start with, hey, what's the intent and purpose of this process and what are we trying to accomplish? But there's a lot of optionality out there.
Yeah, and Greg, it's interesting. I love when questions come up because we got to be audible ready, right? So, Brandy, I'm curious. I know you did some work with between ServiceNow and other systems to support position management because and so that's bringing ServiceNow and HR and pay. Was there an integration framework for that project?
Oh, absolutely. And we had to consider, like Greg said, what problem were we trying to solve or problems and what were our constraints? And in that example, the federal agency that we were serving had a real business need to interact with that data with their position management system of record in real time. They were making changes to positions, workforce restructuring, but due to it being a shared system across federal agencies, they had very hard constraints. So we took the more technically in-depth approach. We did have an integration, but we also orchestrated more of the transactions within ServiceNow than we would have seen had they not had those tight guardrails. But there's a lot of examples, even across enterprise agencies, where let's say I'm an employee and I want to know how many days of vacation do I have remaining for the year. It could be a deep link, like Greg said, or it could be an integration that pulls that data from the HCM for me and I can see it and then I can go transact and ask for time off. So really depends on the use case.
Got it. And so,
You brought
Brandy,
up a hot one
I
for me.
know, and look, I know from an audience standpoint, at least when I looked through it, looked like we had a lot of folks join today where one of their NFC is their key provider. That was an
That's
NFC,
it.
somebody that uses NFC, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it
I
was.
think it's important
Yes.
that we do talk. I know we've talked ServiceNow, we've
Mhm.
talked Core HCM, but I think it's good as we wrap things up to just from a familiarity standpoint, right? Especially in that type of use case is really important, especially as we move to seeing where things go with FitHR 2.0 and HCM modernization.
Yeah, and Tim, if I could just add on to that, because the technical bits and bytes of that are probably not what we're most proud of. It's the interagency collaboration that has to work, the
Mhm.
security and technical challenges. There were a lot of people at the very beginning that said, "Don't pursue that. You can't do that." And I'm really proud of both the federal employees that we worked with, and the team that on the ground that was actually developing the solutions were able to broker those and showed like, hey, here's a good, clean way to orchestrate this integration while maintaining data security and compliance across the board.
And just another example of that is on the recruit to fill side, leveraging ServiceNow with USA Jobs, system of record, that's not going anywhere. That's going to stay. It's currently the system of record that the agency had to use, but they had a real need to have visible data into their time to hire and to be able to track where the friction points were in that process. And rather than using I think Greg mentioned something like a Microsoft SharePoint as a shadow system, they could use ServiceNow as an enterprise platform to help orchestrate that across, but still keep USA Jobs, as an example, as their system of record.
Bahar, I'll give it back over to you. It looks like we're at
All right.
158.
Yes, we have a couple of minutes left, and so I'll place on the screen the key takeaways that I hope everyone's taken away from this session. And that first, just connecting a few threads from the discussion, HCM modernization, HR system modernization is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It solves for systems of record and transaction, but it doesn't solve for how work gets done across all of our enterprise services, and it doesn't solve for how the employees experience the transition and the transformation. Second, again, I tend to focus on employees. Employees are they don't experience programs, they don't experience a modernization effort. What they experience is how it impacts them in the moments that matter to them. And that's the gap that we're talking about. And it's exactly where a unified digital front door becomes critical. And then third, as agencies think about AI, and there's so much to think about, the ones that are making the most progress aren't starting with the AI themselves or itself. They're starting with things like workflows, because if you don't have that foundation, including the data, AI can inform, but it can't act. And what we're seeing now is agencies building that foundation so that AI can actually move work forward. So taken together, this is really about shifting from systems to experiences, and then from information to action. Now, on the screen and as part of our follow-up email, we're going to be sharing with you these same links. And so if you don't get a chance to grab them, we are going to share them with you following this session. And lastly, what I'll leave for you on the screen as we close out the session is links to contact information for each of us. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to support you and help you through through any transformation that you're going through or that you're thinking about and planning, and we would love to be part of that journey with you. Thanks, everyone.